A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has just released episode 5 of the show, and I know I say this every week, but this was definitely the best episode of the season. In true Game of Thrones style, the penultimate one was where the action truly was. This episode not only provided us with the backstory of Sir Duncan the Tall, his experience of living in Flea Bottom, the hope and loss that was at his core, but it also gave us the Trial of Seven and the immediate aftermath of the First Blackfire Rebellion, with the motif of Get Up being spoken by Dunk, Sir Arlan and Egg at different points in the episode. This one showed us exactly why Dunk is the way that he is, and that when facing off against Aerion, it was every wrong in his life that came his way being channeled with the hopes of getting through it. So without further ado, let's just get into it. Here is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms episode 5 ending explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The importance of Dunk's friendship with Rafe. During this episode, we saw that following the Black Dragon falling and him losing the First Blackfire Rebellion, Dunk and his closest friend Rafe were raiding the dead with the hopes of finding any kind of loot so they'd have enough coin in order to get out of the place, which is deemed the most hostile, poverty-ridden place in King's Landing, Flea Bottom. The first time we saw Dunk when he was younger was when he was on the battlefield and one of the soldiers woke up and was crying out for his mother. Dunk was going to kill him, not for the loot, but because he was in pain and suffering. Whereas Rafe wanted to keep them alive so that they could be held for ransom. This brought to light that even though Dunk was going to be bringing about death, he was doing something that was considered to be kind. Whereas Rafe, in allowing life, she was bringing a harsh edge to it. So it showed that from the off they were completely different, but their situation was what brought them together. The importance of the man crying out for his mother in his final moments showed how even the toughest of men can be reduced to an infant in the end and cry out for the person that brought them into the world. With us hearing how Dunk didn't want to leave Flea Bottom because he'd hoped that his mother would one day come looking for him, even though deep down he knew that she was dead. I believe that in his mind, in his dying moments, he didn't like the idea of crying out for somebody that he never truly knew and wasn't in his life. The two friends' relationship was something that was really important in setting the tone and laying the foundations down for Dunk's anger at the end of the episode to reach its climax, and for it to be the very thing that allowed him to overcome Aerion and almost be brought back to life from the dead. With Dunk being hit on the head in the opening part of the episode, this entire section was pretty much about showing us how Sir Arlan saved him, the influence that he had by seeing Sir Arlan saving him when he was going to be killed, and how it directly impacted him to the point where he wanted to become a knight. There was a line of dialogue that I felt was always going to have a large amount of importance in this episode, and it was when Rafe said to Dunk how in Flea Bottom, no one forgets anything. If you hurt someone, they'll hurt you back. This is exactly what we saw with the character Alistair and the fact that he was a bully to Rafe and Dunk. However, with Rafe taking liberties with Alistair and stealing his Elskin container, it was always going to come back and get them. But even then, when Alistair took their coin that he'd saved to find a way out of Flea Bottom, with her taking his blade, the blade that she stole was the very thing that ended up claiming her life and connecting back into the saying of how no one forgets anything. Rafe was the only person that had ever truly been there for Dunk. She was his only family, and he said himself that he only wanted to be with her. So with her being killed and the life being taken for no real reason whatsoever, the anger that he had from all of those years ago was finally coming out towards the end. He'd been wronged on many occasions throughout his life, whether it was being on his own in the slums, being looked down on, and also in seeing Rafe, the person that he loved most, dying in front of his eyes. So when Tanzil was being abused just simply because Aerion couldn't handle seeing a dragon being killed in a fictional setting because he believed it to be treason, Dunk's instincts from all of those years ago were what kicked in. This is also why Dunk was willing to fight hard, because when unleashing absolute hell on Aerion, all of the injustices that he faced, he channeled that loneliness that he felt, the anger that he had, and when attacking him, he wasn't only seeing him, but he was also seeing Alistair in front of him. The importance of Sir Arlan of Pennytree. Before this episode, we knew that Sir Arlan had an influence on Dunk, but what Sir Arlan represented for Dunk following this episode was life, freedom, and the fact that he was an idol. Sir Arlan quite literally saved Dunk's life on 2 different occasions. Sir Arlan of Pennytree emerged from the tavern and slayed Alistair and his companion when he was going to kill Dunk, and as Dunk laid there on the floor, cradling Rafe as she was losing her life, this was where Dunk saw what it was to be a knight firsthand and up close. Dunk saw a man that didn't know him, didn't owe him anything, just stepping up and standing up for somebody that wasn't able to fight back, showing that a knight wasn't simply just about a sword and a shield. That tied into the hero element of it, and also the fact that he represented life. When it came to freedom, Sir Arlan represented that for Dunk, because if it wasn't for him, then he most likely wouldn't have left Flea Bottom. Rafe said to Dunk before she died, "You want a family? Go out there and get a family." And this was Dunk doing exactly that. He obviously planned on leaving Flea Bottom, but with Rafe no longer there, the loneliness that he felt was all-consuming. This was shown to us most with the shots of where he used to stay with her being empty, and also the sadness that was in his eyes. He no longer had anything for him there other than the hope that his mother would one day return, so he stopped waiting for her because the harshness and the brutality of the situation that unfolded in front of him showed that if he didn't live for himself in the present day, then he'd just waste away in Flea Bottom. This is why Dunk ended up following Sir Arlan at a distance, went over to him during the night and got the inspiration and idea in his mind of wanting to be a knight, lifting up the helmet, seeing his sword and dreaming big for the first time in his life. This is also why Dunk cared about Sir Arlan's legacy so much, because Sir Arlan did for others what he did for Dunk and stood by and protected them, and nobody seemed to remember. With Dunk being on the cusp of exhaustion and death because of the water that he drank in the puddle, Sir Arlan said, "Get up," which is a phrase that was then at the heart of the episode. It was essentially what brought Dunk back to life when reliving that moment in his head from when he was younger. Egg was saying it over and over again to Dunk from the stands, and then right at the end of the episode when Baelor had a hole in the back of his head, Dunk was saying it to him. It was two simple words that were just so powerful to hear, to watch in the situations, and it just provided so much emotion to what we were watching. Usually because outside of Sir Arlan saying it, there was emotion embedded to the core. When Dunk was on the cusp of death, we saw that the influence of Sir Arlan was actually the very thing that brought him back to life, and it allowed him to exhibit that very strength that he watched in front of him for many years after Sir Arlan took him under his wing. Sir Arlan of Pennytree might not have been the best fighter, but he had heart, and in this moment, we saw that that's exactly what Dunk had and what he needed. This also brought to light that history was almost repeating itself with Dunk too. Dunk was inspired by, impressed with, and followed Sir Arlan because he wanted a different purpose in life, and within the present day, that's exactly what Egg did to Dunk when he followed him to Ashford and to the forest, and even when he was sharpening the stick like Egg was too. The Trial of Seven and Baelor's death. Nerves were running extremely high during the Trial of Seven, and from the moment that the piece of dialogue, which was, "No man fights so fierce as one neglected by his mother," was spoken, and Lionel also saying, "Mother loved you best. Shame." It simply hinted towards Baelor's death because Maekar was the one that wasn't loved the most as he was an heir to the throne. This important line also tied into the fact that Dunk was neglected by his mother all of those years ago, so it foreshadowed the strength that he was ultimately going to have right at the end. Aerion was a coward through and through. We saw that when he turned down the trial by combat and put forward the Trial of Seven for Dunk, something that hadn't been used in 100 years, and he did this just so he could hide behind 6 others. And with Maekar running over to Aerion after Dunk was starting to fight him and saying, my boy," the protection that he had was something that Dunk had never had, so the strength was more with him. Rafe and Sir Arlan were at the core of Dunk during the entire trial. The wrongdoing that Rafe suffered, Aerion exhibiting narcissistic, entitled traits like Alistair, and the strength and care that he received for Sir Arlan allowed him to get through it. Now, I loved the entire opening section of the fight. The emotion was running high and there was fear that was present in both Dunk and Egg as they had seeds of doubt. They were putting on a brave face for each other, but the instant change in facial expressions from the both of them when they turned away highlighted how they were both concerned about the outcome. Dunk wanted to be a knight. He'd shown traits of what it takes to be a knight in his heart, but the combat was something that he'd never participated in, so it makes sense as to why he was scared. The close-up shot of just his eyes and the sound of his breath echoing around his helmet allowed us to feel every ounce of that fear. Dunk's lack of fighting ability was something that was present in the Trial of Seven too, and I'm glad we didn't see somebody that was able to fight quite easily. He'd been around Sir Arlan, but it was only when Sir Arlan died when he first properly picked up a sword. However, what we did see was the sheer size and power that Sir Dunk had in his arsenal because every blow that he was landing on Aerion was causing maximum damage. The one where Sir Dunk hit him with his open hand and Aerion just dropped was one of my favourite moments in the entirety of the battle. It showed the sheer power that Dunk had behind him, and it just had a personal touch to it too. The level of immersion during the climax was something that was also present during the battle because, like when we heard his breathing during the beginning under the helmet, we could hear the blood just gurgling in his mouth, and I felt like I genuinely couldn't breathe. The sound effects were just simply perfect during this scene. There was a moment where Aerion screamed, "He's dead, it's over," but with Dunk dropping to the floor, the words and motif that had been at the heart of the episode, which was "get up," the words that were spoken by Sir Arlan to him all of those years ago, allowed him to get up. Aerion's face showed that he really didn't want that fight, and with the crowd also turning and chanting "up, up," over and over again, they began to respect the true knight that Dunk was presenting himself as. The point of view of us hearing what Dunk was hearing as he rose, which was just a muted, muffled soundscape of the surroundings, was just perfect, and with Aerion being out of focus too in his vision, it just felt so personal and like we were going through exactly what Dunk was. Egg also screaming "up" made my heart just go. The level of care that Egg has for Dunk is something which ties into the kind, large, soft heart that Dunk has and the way that he is the Sir Arlan of their story. With Dunk then channeling his past, using the shield to harm Aerion, and with Aerion saying that he yielded, the dragging of him over not only made me laugh, but it cemented Dunk as the winner. And in my mind, and I imagine Dunk's, this wasn't only a victory for him, but it was a victory for Rafe and also Sir Arlan. Justice was served in the correct way, and Dunk was the true knight that he always said that he wanted to be. He dreamed big all of those years ago, and now he'd finally achieved it. Even though the battle was the main event in the episode, the aftermath actually provided the most shock. With Baelor Targaryen presenting himself to Dunk, Dunk got onto his knee and said, "I am your man, your grace," showing that he wanted to be a member of the King's Guard. Baelor was going to put him forward to be one because he saw that he was a good man, but as we saw, with Baelor saying that his visor cracked and that his fingers felt like wood, when Baelor's helmet was pulled off of him, we saw that Maekar's mace had done more damage to his brother than what it intended on doing. Maekar wouldn't have wanted to have harmed his brother like that, and with his Kingsguard being sworn to not spill the blood of Baelor, that didn't seem to apply to his brother. The chaos of it all, the mist, the dirt, and the sheer carnage is what probably led Maekar to hit his brother. So seeing that reaction from Maekar will be interesting for sure. With Dunk crying as he held him and said, I'm sorry, he felt the weight of the death because if it wasn't for him, then the Hand to the King wouldn't have been killed like that. Dunk was now the person that was saying get up, but unlike every other occasion that we saw, Baelor wasn't going to be able to, and those two words wouldn't have the same effect. This also connected to the very beginning of the episode when Dunk had somebody that was dying in front of him and he was going to kill him to put him out of his misery. But this time he was in a similar situation and now he wanted to save the person in front of him. I also feel like Dunk knew that with Baelor being killed, that would mean that once King Daeron II relinquishes his responsibility of sitting on the Iron Throne, it'll pass over to Maekar. So I think Dunk could be concerned for his well-being after that, as Baelor was the only person that was looking out for him. My review of the episode. This was easily my favourite episode in the show, and I don't even think the finale's going to top this. I did worry about what it would be like, with it seeming like we were going to be getting the backstory of Dunk from the trailer, but everything that we saw from when he was in Flea Bottom was valuable and it connected to the core of the character. It all just tied together perfectly, as even when he was on top of Aerion knocking everything out of him, it connected to Alistair and it just felt like a full circle moment, and that the justice that he was getting for himself was something that he was also getting for Rafe. The level of emotions that were in this episode were just incredible. I felt so connected to Dunk and Egg throughout the entirety of the show so far, but with this one, by providing the backstory and the history of the character, it meant that the connection to him just grew stronger and stronger. What I'll also say is that it's a testament to the actor that played the young Dunk. This was the first time that we'd seen him in the show other than the brief flashbacks in episode 1 when Dunk was burying Arlan, and considering he was just thrown to us in the story, he absolutely delivered. I also want to call out how well Alistair was played too. For such a short inclusion, he made a large impact and he had that typical Game of Thrones evilness that makes the villains memorable. When it came to the Trial of Seven, the way that it unfolded was just amazing. I know some were hoping for a Season 6 Episode 9 quality, and I feel we did get exactly that. I was holding my breath from start to finish, and the way that the choreography was structured with the horses running through, the camera being low on the ground amongst the chaos, it almost feeling like a single take shot at points, and the mist, dirt and mud making characters unrecognizable. It truly did make me feel like I was there, and it's up there for me. The makeup and the way that Dunk looked in this episode, with his wounds, his bloody face, the bruises, and the sheer disorientated nature that he had was quite harrowing. He was almost like a man possessed, and when he screamed, "Tell them," when he wanted Aerion to yield, I felt that passion in my bones. Whether it be the fear in his eyes through the tiniest of slits in his helmet, or even the hysterics that he was in as Baelor died and he was holding on to him, the performance by Peter Claffey was one of his finest of the season for sure. One element that I do wish we had have seen more of in this episode is the fighting from the others. Lionel Baratheon is known to be a formidable fighter in the story, but we never really got to see it. I ultimately think that comes down to the fact that the runtime of the episodes are just quite short, but it makes sense. However, I did have an appetite for it. Another element that I did really like about this episode was that we got to see Sir Arlan and the actual influence that he had on Dunk. He wasn't the best fighter, he fought dirty, but it all kind of tied into the main traits of the character and the other parts of his life. It always felt like Rafe was going to be killed, most likely by Alistair, but when it happened, it was a really sad moment. The fact that it took her the entirety of the battle between Sir Arlan and Alistair and his companion to die, it showed that it was a slow, painful death. With regards to the ending, when Baelor was revealed to have died, that was a moment that I thought was heartbreaking. He's been the least Targaryen out of the Targaryens in the show, and he was my favourite since King Viserys, so when he had that massive gap in the back of his head, accompanied by Dunk being in tears, I felt every one of them. With only one episode to go in the show now, I can't wait to see how it's going to wrap up, with the news that the show is going to be returning for future seasons. If it continues with the quality that this has had, then I'm excited to see more. So, there you have it, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms Episode 5 Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos on A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, then check the playlist below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. What did you think of this episode? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.